For years, America's electric grid had one quiet advantage: demand was not moving very fast. There were still problems, bills still rose, storms still exposed weak spots, utilities still had to replace aging equipment and plan for the future. But the overall forecast was manageable. The country was not suddenly asking the grid to support an entirely new layer of the economy. Now that assumption is changing. The U.S. Energy Information Administration expects electricity use to grow again in 2026 and 2027. If that forecast is realized, the country could see its strongest four-year stretch of electricity demand growth since 2000. A major reason is not just homes. It is not just electric vehicles. It is not just hotter summers. It is the rapid growth of large computing centers, the buildings behind artificial intelligence, cloud storage, and the digital services Americans use every day. The cloud has never been weightless. It sits on land. It needs cooling. It connects to substations. It depends on transmission lines, and it runs on electricity. That is the pressure building inside the American power system. The economy is asking for more power. The grid may not be able to deliver it fast enough. This is not a story about a nationwide blackout tomorrow. It is not a claim that the grid is collapsing. The problem is more practical and harder to solve. Demand can arrive quickly, the grid cannot. A data center can be planned and financed much faster than a major transmission line can be approved and built. A new factory can request power before the local system has enough capacity to serve it. A region can attract billions of dollars in investment, then discover that the limiting factor is not land, tax breaks, or labor. It is electricity. For a long time, Americans were told the future would be digital, automated, and connected. What was easier to miss is that this future would also be power-hungry. According to the Department of Energy and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, electricity use from U.S. data centers has grown sharply over the past decade and could rise significantly again by 2028. The exact path depends on efficiency, technology, and business decisions. But the direction is clear. Large computing loads are becoming part of America's electricity challenge. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which monitors grid reliability, has pointed to the same pressure. In its long-term reliability work, NERC says data centers and large commercial and industrial loads are driving major increases in demand forecasts across parts of North America. That matters because the grid does not feel demand evenly. A modest national increase can look manageable on paper. But when that demand lands in a few fast-growing regions, the pressure becomes local, concentrated, and immediate. Texas is one example. Parts of the PJM region are another. Areas in the West are facing their own version of the same problem. In these places, data centers and other large loads are no longer minor additions to the forecast. They are changing the forecast itself, and the answer is not as simple as building more power plants. When people hear that America needs more electricity, they usually think about generation. More natural gas plants, more solar farms, more wind, more batteries, maybe keeping older plants online longer. But electricity does not help anyone simply because it is produced somewhere. It has to move. It has to travel through transmission lines, pass through substations, and arrive at the exact place it is needed. It has to be available during the hottest afternoons, the coldest nights, and the hours when the system is under the most stress. That delivery system is where time becomes the constraint. Transmission lines can take years. Permitting can be slow. Local opposition can delay projects. Cost disputes can drag on. Interconnection queues can become crowded. Large equipment, including transformers, cannot always be secured quickly. Utilities also cannot plan only for average demand. They have to plan for peak demand, the moments when the system is stretched and reliability matters most. That is why federal regulators have been pushing changes in long-term transmission planning. In 2024, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued Order No. 1920, a rule designed to improve regional transmission planning and clarify how costs are shared. The logic is straightforward. The grid has to be planned before the need becomes urgent. That is difficult when demand is changing faster than old planning models expected. For most households, this can feel distant. A data center in Texas or Virginia may seem far removed from a family opening an electric bill at the kitchen table, but the connection is real. Electric bills do not only reflect fuel costs, they also reflect the cost of maintaining the grid, upgrading equipment, building new capacity, and keeping the system reliable. When utilities spend heavily on infrastructure, those costs often move into customer rates over time. That does not mean artificial intelligence is responsible for every increase in an electric bill. It is not. Bills are shaped by fuel prices, weather, local regulation, storm hardening, utility investment, and regional market conditions. But the new race for electricity can become part of what ordinary customers pay for, and electricity is not optional. Families can cut back on restaurants, they can delay a vacation, they can look for cheaper groceries, but they cannot simply stop using refrigeration, heating, cooling, lights, appliances, phones, medical devices, or the internet. For retirees on fixed incomes, even small increases can hurt. For renters, utility bills add pressure on top of housing costs. For small businesses, higher electricity costs can squeeze thin margins. For manufacturers, power is not just another expense, it is part of the cost of operating. For local economies, electricity is becoming a competitive advantage. A community may want the jobs and tax revenue that come with a new data center or factory. State and local leaders may welcome the investment. Utilities may see growth. Landowners may benefit. But the grid still has to serve everyone else. That is where the tension becomes harder. If a large new customer requires major upgrades, who pays? Should the company creating the demand carry more of the cost? Should the cost be spread across the broader customer base? Should utilities build ahead of demand, even if forecasts later change? And what happens when demand arrives before the infrastructure is ready? There is no painless answer. Build too slowly, and regions can face delays, reliability risks, or expensive catch-up work. Build too quickly, and customers may pay for infrastructure that proves larger than necessary. Lean too heavily on older power plants, and the system can face aging equipment and fuel price exposure. Add new resources without enough transmission and backup capacity, and reliability becomes harder to manage. The grid has always required balance. That balance is becoming more difficult because the demand side is changing. Artificial intelligence makes the shift visible because it turns digital growth into physical load. Every cloud service, data platform, automated tool, and model training system depends on real infrastructure somewhere. Behind the screen are buildings, cooling systems, transformers, wires, and power contracts. The digital economy is not floating above the physical economy. It is plugged into it. That is why this moment matters. America is not just adding more electricity demand. It is adding demand that can be large, concentrated, and urgent. A region can have enough power over the course of a year and still face stress during peak hours. It can add new generation and still lack transmission. It can welcome new investment and still struggle to connect it. Reliability is not only about producing enough energy in total. It is about having the right resources, in the right places, at the right times. The next few years could unfold in several ways. In the best case, utilities, regulators, grid operators, and large customers plan early. New generation comes online. Transmission planning improves. Data centers become more efficient. Large users pay more directly for the infrastructure they require. The system grows, but it grows in a controlled way. In a more strained case, demand moves faster than the grid can adapt. Some projects wait longer to connect. Some utilities seek larger rate increases. Some older power plants stay online longer than expected. Local fights over who pays become more intense. The country may not face one national crisis. It may face a patchwork problem, some regions with enough power to grow, and others where the grid becomes a brake on growth. That would affect more than utility planning. It would influence where companies build, where jobs appear, how local budgets develop, and how much pressure households feel in their monthly bills. This does not require panic. It requires a more honest view of the economy America is building. For years, the electric grid was treated like background infrastructure, something that would simply be there when the next wave of technology arrived. Now that assumption is being tested. The future may be digital, it may be automated, it may be shaped by artificial intelligence, but it still depends on a physical system. Power plants, substations, transformers, transmission lines, workers, permits, rates, and time. America can build a bigger electric system. The harder question is whether it can build the right system fast enough, fairly enough, and reliably enough for the economy now arriving. Because every new technology has a hidden foundation. For the next American economy, that foundation is the grid.